Hey, shalom and welcome to Wisdom and Torah Ministries. Did you know? Hey, did you know that in the ancient world, the Ark of the Covenant, as we know in the Torah, it was covered in last week's Torah portion, and we know that the Torah tells us about the footstool of the Creator, which is the Ark of the Covenant, because the heavens and the earth are His throne. Now, let me ask you this. Did you know that in the ancient world, the ancient kings also had what they thought was what is called the throne, the Ark? So, check this out. I want to show you something in regards to the contrast of the Temple of Elohim versus the contrast of the temples of pagan gods. Now, when we study the Bible and we go to history, anthropology, archaeology, and the ancient Near East, we notice that they used to do sacrifices, that they had priests, that they had temples, but yet we believe that the Temple of Elohim is the one true temple, and it's holy, it's high level of Kedushah. So therefore, we have to understand what are the differences between one and the other. Let me show you some pictures on this section of Did You Know, making the contrast between the holiness of the temple of the Elohim of Israel versus the temples of the pagan gods. And we'll see the differences as we go along and as far as we can cover on this part of Did You Know. Let's go right to the PowerPoint so you see what I mean. All right? Now, as you continue to look, this is an ancient ark. Now, what did the ark represent in the ancient world? It represented the throne of the king. So it really nothing new, except that psychologically you're going to have when you have the Egyptians, pulling out their what they call their throne of their Pharaoh, and now psychologically, remember when you have the Elohim of Israel, the Ark of the Covenant is leading them in the wilderness, but there's no one sitting on it. So the people are going to ask, well, who's leading them? Who's their king? Because in the ancient world, the kings were the leaders that led the kingdom into battle. So psychologically, every time Israel won a war, that sent a message psychologically, because now when they look at the ark leading them in the wilderness and they don't see anyone sitting on that throne, except that is this footstool of the Elohim of God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, all of a sudden I was saying, wait a minute. Their God that no one can see, their Elohim that no one knows, that has no image, defeated our king? Psychologically, that gives a huge victory. And that what we see here is Pharaoh in a portable throne, like a box-like design. So what did the ark represent? The footstool of the Creator, and the heavens is the throne. He sits on the throne, and the earth becomes the footstool as we continue to move in. Let's go to the next one. It's another image right there that you see. So what is really the Ark of the Covenant being carried by the Levites all about? Because you may say, well, wait a minute. They used to do it for the ancient pagan kings. So what makes the Torah any different? The fact is that the Torah is establishing Yah as the king of Israel instead of any human king. That's why in the Bible, it was never intended for a human to be king of Israel. From the beginning, the Creator wanted to him be the king of Israel. And remember that it was the people who asked for King Saul. So we see clearly that Yahweh wanted to be the king of Israel, and that no image will be a representation. So later on, there was a human being named a king who was the representation of that great king, the sovereign, the suzerain who's in the heavenly realm. Let me show you a few more things that I think you may find interesting. All right? Let's move on to the next few slides. All right. Now, as we see Pharaoh on the portable throne, okay, we also have to understand what the footstool is. In the Corinthians 15, 1 Corinthians 15, it uses the language of a suzerain and a vassal. Okay, Pharaoh's footstool, we know that Yahweh has the footstool on the earth is Jerusalem now, because that's where the temple was. That's where he dwells. That's where he rests when the temple was standing. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 24 to 27 says, Then come the ends. Then the end comes when he will deliver up the kingdom to God, even the Father, when he will have abolished all rule and authority and power. He must reign until he has put all his enemies under his feet. The last enemy that will be abolished is death. And he put all things in subjection under his feet. But when he says all things are put in subjection, it is evident that he is accepted who subjected all things to him. So this is a language, classical language, that Paul is using for a suzerain and a vassal king, and how he submits under the great king. This is quite clearly letting us know a ancient Near Eastern language of submitting under your feet. Now, let me show you from a statue that you found in the Bible Lands Museum in Jerusalem that's called the statue of Manasseh II. Check this out. I think you'll find this interesting. How you find, what you see on the screen, is an ancient footstool, and it has 9 people captive. They were either Africans or Semitic, and they had their hands tied, and they represented authority over them. It represented the kingdom was submitting those people. Now, the same thing is, when you see the feet of Ramses II in the Bible Lands Museum, you see that there are 9 lines under his feet. Now, if you go back to Psalms 83, it talks about the enemies of the Lord. Okay? That they all will be under his feet. So what we see here is a little representation of what Paul is talking about in 1 Corinthians, and what the Bible all clearly keeps talking about when he has all authority and power, that all power will be given back to him. That's an idiom to that. Now, this is one of Tutankhamun's thrones. Okay? And on his footstool, there are 9 bows. The Egyptian name for the traditional enemies of Egypt. So literally, when the king will sit, when the Pharaoh will sit on his throne, on his chair, he's putting his feet on the people that are captive. And also the sandals. Yet another candid racial image from Tutankhamun's tomb is to be found in the pair of his sandals, inlaid with a picture of a Semite and black Nubian bound up. The Pharaoh will trample his enemies underfoot when he walked. The Egyptian king's sandals have bound black and Semitic prisoners inlaid in his soles. So when the king walked in the shoes, he would crush the enemies of Egypt underfoot. So clearly we can see this particular language as something the Bible talks about. Now, this teaching comes from my temple conference that we did this year in Orlando, Florida. So if you want to know more about this and you want to hear the whole teaching, please go to my website, wisdomandtorah.com, and there you'll be able to see the teaching, or you can go into Rooted in Torah with Ryan White, and you can order the whole set there. I think you'll really find really important piece of information, all of the teachings combined that will help us understand the temple and the contrast and the distinction. So let me give some of the basic distinctions between Elohim's temple and the pagan temples. All right? Now, in the book of Deuteronomy, it gives us a guideline of what to do. It says, when Yahweh your Elohim shall cut off the nations from before you, where you are going to dispossess them, and you dispossess them and dwell in their land, take heed to yourself that you do not be snared to follow them, after that they are destroyed from before you, and that you are not inquire after their gods, saying, how do this nation serve their gods? Even so I will do likewise. You shall not do so to Yahweh your Elohim, for every abomination to Yahweh, which he hates, have they done to their gods. For even their sons and their daughters do they turn in the fire to fire in their gods. Now, you must ask the question then. It's only logical. And by the way, this is the question that the verses that I saw that provoked me to go back to the ancient world to look and see what was happening back then. If our king does not want us to mix the holy and the profane, right? And he clearly tells us, do not worship the Creator the way the nations, the Canaanites, and the way the Hittites, and the way the Egyptians worship their gods, then don't you think it's logical for us to go and investigate their culture, their type of temples, their worship? Now, let me give you an example. Now, you may think, well, in the story of Joseph, Joseph, he defined the dream that the Pharaoh had. The father gave him the revelation of that dream, and he was able to really decipher the dream. But notice something really interesting, that Pharaoh gives to Joseph the daughter of the priest of On, of Potiphar, right? So I always wonder, how come did he give a daughter of a priest? By the way, did you know that the priests were the highest of the scale of the caste system in Egypt? It was Pharaoh, it was the dignitaries and the priests. Therefore, Joseph got raised in honor from a slave or a prisoner to like second in command. And then he was given a priest's daughter. Why is that? In the ancient world, okay, in the ancient world, they believed that only the priests and only the kings can hear the voice of their gods. This is really important. They believe, let me repeat that again. Did you know that in the ancient world, they believed that only the kings and the priests of their temples had the authority or the means to hear word from their gods? Now we know that there's no other gods, but that's what they believe. So the Hittites believe the same thing too. The Mesopotamians, they believe the same thing too. And the Egyptians believe it also. Now all of a sudden, there comes Joseph. Joseph is a slave. He comes out and he says, well, I know the dream. Now imagine what they're thinking in the Egyptian court, that you have this guy who's a slave, and now he hears and he can decipher dreams. So surely he is a priest of his God. And when he says the God, Joseph is given honor to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So that means that to Pharaoh, he understood, well, this guy is a priest from his country. So he gave him a daughter of a priest. So that comes to this verse that, in my opinion, has been really, really misused to justify all the theological positions. I'm not going to get into that. I'm just going to talk about what this necessarily, another interpretation of this verse in Exodus chapters 19. We know that when Israel came out of Egypt, they were an oppressed people in the lowest caste, slaves. They had no rights. They were oppressed. They cried out to Yah. Yah heard their voice, and he sent the Redeemer to take the children of Israel with a mighty hand, with a strong hand, and great power. Now, he takes them to Mount Sinai. In Mount Sinai, he wants to reveal himself to all of Israel. But wait a second. They're not holy people. They are not people that can withstand the holiness of the king. So what does the Lord do? He raises up the level of Israel from slaves to Am Kadosh, to holy people, so that now they can feel the presence, so that now they can be in the presence of the king as a Kadosh, or a high level of Kedusha. But more importantly, he raises the level by making them a kingdom of priests. Remember that in the ancient world, they believed that only priests and kings can hear the voices of their God. So could it be possible that while we are looking at those verses only as one perspective, could it be possible that we may be missing out one of the key important information about the overall meaning to the Israelites when that happened at that time? So when we read in Exodus 19, verse 5, it says, now, if you will listen to me and carefully keep my covenant, you will be my own possession out of all the peoples, though all the earth is mine, and you shall be my kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall say to Israel. So all of a sudden, in order for Israel to hear the voice of their king, he raised up their honor, and from slaves to free people, from free people to a kingdom of priests, so that everybody would hear his voice, so that then everybody would know around the nations that this people Israel are not like the nations, that they are all royal people. Okay? Now, with that being said, this is one of the contrasts. What happened in chapters 19? Later on, all of the people heard the voice, and it scared the living daylights out of them. And they sent Moses to intercede on their behalf. Now, I believe that this is a very important topic that we should cover, because unfortunately, we're not looking at these verses from the contextual understanding of the time frame and the understanding of what they believed in the time when it was given. Okay? Now, if we continue on our PowerPoint, I want to show you all the contrast of the ancient world from the Temple of Elohim. Okay? Watch. Okay, now, in Psalms 121, verse 1 and 2, a very interesting verse that we all know. It says, I will lift up my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? And a question. My help comes from Adonai, who made the heavens and the earth. Now, I want to ask you a question. Was the Levites who were looking at the hills and they're saying, oh, I feel inspired today, and says, from where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord. No, there was a reason why the Levites were saying that, because it's called high places in Israel. It's already known through the prophets that Israel became an idolatrous nation, that Israel worshiped all the gods, that Israel even adhered to practices of abominable practices. So the Levi is looking at the hills. What do they see in the hills? All the gods, Asherah, okay, or Baal, or Moloch, and their worship on high mountains. Why? Because they believe that their gods dwell in mountains. That's why it says that the God of Israel, he's the God of mountain. Why? That's why Jerusalem is his holy mountain. So that everybody will know that the God of Israel is the only Elohim and there's no one else. That's why he took them to Mount Sinai on a mountain. And they went right by a place that is called Baal Safon, an island, right in the crossing the Red Sea. And they had a temple of Baal Safon, the God of the mountain, to make a contrast, to let the ancient world that the Elohim of Israel, he is the God of mountain. He is the Elohim of creation, right? So now, can I submit to you that the Levites, when they're looking at the hills, what do they see? Baal, Asherah, all the gods made of wood, all the gods made of stone, like the one you see here. So could it be possible, that's a image of Moloch. Could it be possible that the Levi is saying, I will lift my eyes to the hills. And when he sees the gods, he asks the question, from where does my help come from? I mean, Baal was the god of the storm, Baal was the god of the rain, Baal was the god of power. So therefore, Asherah was the god of fertility, Easter, whatever you want to call her, Ishtar. And then the Levi says, my help comes from Yah, who made the heavens and the earth. In other words, the singers in the Levi, or Shir HaMa'alot, or the Psalms of Ascent, they're looking at the mountain and they're saying, my help comes from the creator of heaven and earth. It doesn't come from those idols that they are worshiping. What an amazing contrast when you understand it now in the setting of what they're looking at and they're living at the time. Next. Now, in the ancient world, let me continue here. In the ancient world, they have what is called number of deities they'll worship. Like, for example, the Hittite Empire, there was known as the land of 1,000 gods. In place of a single, omnipresent, all-knowing deity, the Hittites believed that the world was populated by a multitude, indeed, a plenitude of spirits and divine forces. The whole cosmos thrived with supernatural life. Okay? God inhabited the realms above and below the earth. And on the earth, every rock, mountain, tree, springs, and rivers had his resident God or spirit. Right? So in the Torah, he makes a distinction. He says, I am Yahweh Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Mitzrayim, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other ones before me. You do not make any image of yourself, any carved image of the likeness of what is in the heaven above, or which is on the earth beneath, and which is on the waters under the water. Why? Because I covered before, what is the lake of fire? They believe that the lakes, the seas, and the rivers was the gateway to hell, which is called Ei or Enki in the Mesopotamian myth, and also Poseidon in the Greek mythology. So therefore, what we see here is that they believe that the image was a representation of their God. They knew that the image was not their God. They believed that the spirit of that God would dwell within that image. By the way, you want to know a little bit more about that, please check out last week's little article that Ryan White writes on his website, Rooted in Torah. It's really, really good. He did an amazing job explaining that. So anyway, let me continue, all right? Let me continue. The next one, I'll show you this. The number of temples. The tabernacle at first was at the centrality of Israel's in the camp. Into the land was conquered, and eventually Solomon built a temple on Mount Moriah and in Jerusalem. The Hittites, however, they had gods require multiple of temples and temple personnel and constant flow of gifts and sacrifices as reward for services rendered or promised, or to ensure the services that are not withheld. The next thing, let me show you another thing. Interaction with people. As you notice, in Israel, the Elohim of Israel says, and you shall put the lid of atonement on top of the altar of the ark, and put into the ark of witness, which I give you. And I shall meet with you there, and from above the lid of atonement, from between the two cherubims, which are on the ark of witness, I shall speak to you, which I command you concerning the children of Israel. Now listen to this. The Hittites, they believe that once summoned, the guy might use as his first stopping place on earth a mountain which lay in the vicinity of the temple to which he had been summoned, and from there he came to his temple and entered into his called image in the temple innermost sanctuary. The image became the God's earthly casing. His physical needs now have been attended to, and this is really cool. It's amazing how ridiculous they were. They do this to this day. In the Catholic worship of idols, they do this too. Check this out. On a daily basis, he had to be washed, anointed, dressed in clean garments, and given food and drink. Okay, wait a second. Time out. Excuse me? You mean to tell me that the gods that they worship come down to an image, and now you have to take care of the image? Because the God that you worship, that you give everything to, now doesn't have the power to maintain his own self. He has to be fed. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, this is why there's no food allowed inside the holy place or the holy holies to eat. They can have the bread, but no food were allowed to eat inside, so that no one will say that you are feeding the God of Israel. No food was allowed. The bread of presentation is a representation of the 12 tribes of Israel. But no one is supposed to go in there and eat the meat of the sacrifices or eat the bread or anything like that. Why? Because he's making a distinction. The Elohim of Israel, he doesn't need to be fed by us or washed by us or taken care of by us. No, he takes care of us because he's our king and we are his servants. Okay? Next. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, who performed the temple rites? Let's go there real quick. Check this out. In the Hittite, the rituals for no more offerings were done by priesthood designated by kings except on festivals. The king himself did offerings and rites as he himself was being worshipped as the embodiment of the gods. Now in the Torah, says Exodus 27:21, in the tent of meeting outside of the veil, which is before the witness, Aaron and his sons are to tend it from evening until morning, before Yahweh, a law forever in their generations for the children of Israel. Aaron was not a king. That's why. To make a distinction. That's why the priests in the beginning were never kings. They've never been kings. Okay? And we know the roles of Messiah. The role of the Messiah today is he's a high priest. Okay? And then when he returns in the clouds of heaven, he's going to be the king. Well, he's not going to be officiating as a priest because he's going to be on the earth. And as long as we're on the earth, then the Levites are the priests. Okay? Next. Let's move on to the next one. Blood and magic. Ooh, check this out. I got to read this. Hold on. Watch. It says, the Hittites would partake in blood offerings made to their gods by dipping their bread into and eating and drinking the blood. They also would use magic and divination in their rituals at the temples to influence the gods. Now, in Leviticus 19:26, we make a distinction. Do not eat meat with blood. Do not practice divination or magic. Why? They used to read the liver. By the way, let me show you something. Let me tell you something. Did you know that in the Egyptian mythology, in the book of Ezekiel talks about this, and the Egyptian worship of gods in the ancient world, they used to kill the animals and read the liver, and they used to try to prophesy using divination by reading the livers, and the book of Ezekiel talks about that. And that's why the entrails of every animal are thrown on the altar, because the Elohim of Israel says, excuse me, I don't want anybody saying that I have to have my priests to have magic and divination. By the way, this is why the service in the temple by the priest, mostly 99.9% of the time, was done in silence. Okay? I'm talking about the priest officiating, so that the nations will not say that you're causing divination and doing the abominable things to honor Yah. That's why there were never any women as priests in the temple. There's no priestesses allowed. Why? Because it is believed in the ancient world, just like in the first century, you have the Vesta virgins. They used to dedicate themselves as virgins to their gods. And then you also had temple prostitutes in the imperial worship and imperial cult. So it was the case in the ancient world. So thus, in the temple of my king, he is protecting the honor of the women by not allowing them to be priestesses in his temple, so that the nations will not say that the Elohim of Israel treats his women as prostitutes, his children as prostitutes. This is one of the examples that we can take from making a contrast and researching the ancient Near East with our scriptures, and the Bible and the Torah just comes alive when we recognize how awesome, how exalted our king is. Now, this is the last one. I'll let you go with this one, but check it out. Sacrificial animals. In the Hittite ritual, I'm only connecting the Hittites, but if you go to the Egyptian, it's equally as abominable. You know, the Hittite ritual, they used to use pigs, piglets, puppies, dogs, and donkeys, right? But in the Torah, you use a bull, a lamb, goats, and a pigeon. Clean animals. How come those other animals are not allowed? Because if they are using the pig, right, in order to bring those sacrifices to Adonai, then if he allows it to happen in the temple, then everybody's going to make a connection. Oh, yeah, so they're worshiping the God of the Hittites or the Greeks and things like that. It's extremely important, ladies and gentlemen, that as believers in the Messiah, we start and we begin to make the differences between the way that we worship the Father and the way that we serve our Master Yeshua compared to the way the nations worship their pagan gods. Because the last thing we want to do, ladies and gentlemen, is mix the holy and the profane. You want to know more about this, please visit our website, wisdomandtorah.com. And remember, do not believe what I say, verify everything I say. And I pray that this little did you know, maybe I went a little longer than I wanted to, may be edifying to you, may be a blessing to you. And if you want to know more about temple service, please visit wisdomandtorah.com or Rooted in Torah and check out Ryan White's or also Joseph Good's website, Atikva Ministries, and check out all this information that we need to learn about the temple and the temple of my King and your King. So we learn how to please him, how to honor him the way he deserves to be praised and honored. Shalom. We'll see you soon.